Hello everyone, my name is Anatoly Latayev and I'm currently in Antigua and Barbuda. When I travel to a new place for more than 2 to 3 months, which questions are the most important to me? First off, how safe is it here? What can I do here with a child because my son is 2 years old and I should understand whether there are kindergartens here or some sort of community? Playgrounds, what is the quality of the food here, and the medicine? Regarding how safe Antigua is, we're going to talk to a man who has been living here for a while. Because even if you only spend a month here, or 2, or 3, you still won't have fully immersed yourself as deep as you should into the environment, and it's doubtful that you'll have the right impression.
I moved here in 2009. So Nadia had her business, Luxury Locations, and I was running a business doing consultancy in the UK. We met and Nadia came to the UK. It was winter. We both got flu, and then I came to Antigua a week later, and then I was like, well, if we're going to move anywhere, I should move here. I didn't choose Antigua. My wife chose Antigua, and then I met my wife and she was living here. But she chose Antigua. She was working in Mallorca at the time, and came out here for the winter season. Obviously in Mallorca it's cold and it's wet and not very nice. She came out here and kind of fell in love with Antigua. There's a lot of beaches. You know, we've got good water. The diving's not bad. It's good for fishing. It's a friendly community. So in that respect, I think that's why Nadia stayed. She fell in love with Antigua, I fell in love with her, so I end up in Antigua. Antigua, you will often hear people say we have 365 beaches, which I think sometimes people don't necessarily kind of click onto because it seems like a catchphrase. But actually, if you take a boat down the west coast, we do have literally hundreds of pure white sand beaches. If you go to St. Kitts, then their beaches are nothing like. We may take the boat out with the kids at the weekend. We'll drive down the coast and we'll stop at a beach which is maybe 150 meters long, white sand, turquoise water. If there's one other person on the beach, we'll go to another beach. That's how many beaches there are. We're like, it's too crowded. There is someone else there. So we want to take our boat to our own, not private, but obviously it's completely secluded, and you get it all the way up the west coast.
One more interesting thing that I noticed about Antigua is that there is a car in basically every single backyard. The cars, as a rule, are all missing tires, engines, and windows. In general, going off the fact that they have nowhere to drive those cars, they just toss all of that junk in their backyard. So when you're driving around residential districts, specifically ones where the locals live, it seems funny at first, but then you get used to it. If you look around and see a yard without a car, you know that something is probably wrong. We asked the taxi driver we had earlier today about this tradition, and he answered that yes, people just put these cars out in their yards and keep them there. He also has one in his yard. And he said, well, what am I supposed to do with it? Where do I put it? I'm not just gonna push it off a cliff into the ocean. And I said, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they made friends at school, they went to daycare. Like anywhere else, you have play dates, you know, they go off and, I mean, our kids didn't, but obviously once they get older, they'll go off to the cinema. In lots of respects, I think growing up in the Caribbean, it's a very outdoor life, you know, in comparison to, I suppose, the UK and the States, where I think things are much more indoors and it's much more online, iPads, tech, computers. The advantage with Antigua and the Caribbean is, you know, this is it, you know. It's nice. You want to go to the beach, you want to go swimming, you want to go diving, you want to go sailing. It's great weather all the time, you can go hiking. So it tends to be a lot more outdoors life. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty healthy. I mean, our kids love it here. There's good schools here. There's an international school. So there's daycare from age 2 to sort of 5. and then there's an international school that does the International Baccalaureate, Island Academy, and they're very well known across the region for their education, and they obviously go from sort of age 5, 6 up till 18. So if people do move here and they want to educate their children, they can do. Obviously children have they've got the potential to have a great experience here. They can learn to scuba dive, sail, water ski.
There's also an international airport here that opened in 2015. It operates flights from London, New York, Miami, Toronto, and a few other large hubs. It's also easy to fly to any other Caribbean island from here.
Antigua is possibly one of the safest countries in the Caribbean. Overall, people very often kind of group the countries together and say, well, actually, I've heard the Caribbean's not safe. So for example, certain areas in Jamaica, they're very unsafe. But it's kind of unfair to compare that with Antigua. It's kind of like saying, well, New York is the same as San Francisco. It's, there's a big difference between the two. I mean, Antigua's a very small country. It's sort of 10 miles by 10 miles. People tend to realize that 60 to 70% of all of the GDP of Antigua comes from tourism. And one serious issue can cause lots and lots of problems. So it's in everyone's interest all across the board to really look after tourists and visitors, because everyone knows that, say for example, something goes wrong and that hits the international news, that is very, very bad for the GDP of the country. So it's not that everyone takes care, it's just that collectively all the people go, well look, you don't want to be doing that.
By the way, the salaries here aren't as low as you may think. I initially thought that there was a split in the Caribbean, just like there is in Cuba. So for example, there are separate prices for tourists and locals. There's no such split here. And you can see pretty plainly that people here are earning pretty well. Because, well, just to use an example, if you want to eat in a restaurant, a normal restaurant and not some super great place, it's going to run you about $100 to $200 minimum for two. And this is without a bunch of drinks or bottles of good wine.
No, we're much more safety conscious. If we visit the UK, we're much more safety conscious in the UK. I can leave my bag in the car and it's got 2 laptops in there. I can be pretty confident that I can leave it in there and nothing will happen. In the UK, I wouldn't be so confident. The window would be smashed and it might be taken. Likewise, we manage 60 properties in Antigua, and in the last 10 years we've had, I don't think we've ever had a break-in, and we've never had a burglary. The only time that we know where people think if something gets stolen, it's always normally the person that they've hired. So for example, they're like, oh, I met this person who's doing my cleaning for me. And we're like, okay. And then they're like, oh, some things have gone missing. That is pretty much the only crime we ever hear of. But it's a very safe place to live.
In the case that you decide to not just buy a passport but also move to Antigua with your children, you should know there is a university here that is excellent by Caribbean standards.
It's a university and it's associated with certain hospitals on the east coast of the States. I don't know a huge amount about it, but effectively you do your study here and then you do your residency in the States. We don't have huge schools. The university is quite big and it's relatively new. They're developing more departments, as things grow. It's an affluent group who come here. So effectively the majority of visitors are from North America and from the UK. And they come mainly obviously for weather, sailing, lifestyle, but they're relatively wealthy. So obviously when they come with their families, they want a service which suits that. In general, we have found it, luckily we haven't had to have much medical sort of treatments and things like that. Access to medicine is very easy. If you have insurance, it's a big advantage. Obviously I come from the UK where healthcare effectively is free. So you turn up to the hospital, you wait, you don't pay a bill. In general, because there's quite a large sort of private sector aspect in Antigua, the quality can be really good. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I injured my hand. I went to the hospital. I said I need an X-ray. 10 minutes later, the X-ray was done. The radiologist, sit down with him, 15 minutes. Obviously, you pay, but you can see a doctor at any time. You know, whereas coming from the UK, if I want to see a doctor at 4 in the afternoon, I've got to book an appointment, I might have to wait 2 days. Or I go to the hospital and I wait a couple of hours. Here, we've got a doctor on our mobile, call them up, hi, can I come see you? Yep, see you in 20 minutes. So my son was ill over Christmas, he's 4, and it was about 7 o'clock at night, so his fever was going up. It was Christmas, I think it was Boxing Day, so 26th of December. So ordinarily, that would be difficult to think, right, you know, it's a public holiday, it's 7 o'clock in the evening. For us, it was no problem at all. Called the doctor, he's got a temperature of 104. He said, bring him down, we'll see you in 20 minutes. So he was in a hospital bed, he had a cannula in, had some antibiotics, took him home at 9 o'clock, and then we brought him back the next day at 9. They opened up especially for us. There's a nurse there. So in that respect, the healthcare is very good. Obviously, if you were going to have serious operations, you would probably want to go to a larger hospital.
So you don't need to go to a big land if it's some just common things?
No, I mean, for the majority of common things, personally, I've found actually access to healthcare easier in Antigua than in the UK. Simply because if I want the service, I can just pay for it.
Antigua is one of the most developed islands among the 5 Caribbean countries that sell passports. There's a university here and supermarkets that are pretty decently sized for a country with a population of just 70,000 people. A good amount of Americans and Canadians travel here. What I mean is I've seen more of them here than on St. Kitts and Nevis. This is just my opinion, but I do think that this island is very well suited for residents, despite the fact that it's really quite small.
Around the island, obviously all islands have similar, but there's certain sort of pockets. So for example, English Harbour, where we are now, there's a lot of visitors that come here. Some stay year-round. It's probably not the largest year-round community, simply because in the high season we get a huge amount of boats. We get these super yachts and mega yachts here. So in English Harbour the population tends to fluctuate more. Jolly Harbour, which is in the middle of the west coast, probably has the largest all-around sort of round year permanent population. And then obviously in the season it goes up and down, but in that area there's a lot of hotels, there's quite a lot to do.
So you don't need to go to St. John's just to arrive?
To be honest, actually it's quite interesting, because when people have never come to Antigua, they always think, right, I need to go to the capital, St. John's. If you talk to most people who live in English Harbour and you talk to most people who live in Jolly Harbour, they probably go to St. John's maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Mainly for Christmas presents and Valentine's and that sort of thing.
So really, the cities and the people absolutely live their own lives. And those that come here, I mean expats, those that come here on yachts and winter here, those 2 worlds have practically no overlap whatsoever, even if you're in Antigua's capital. Despite the fact that some of these houses don't have the best looking exteriors, I never felt unsafe. So yes, there is a defined dilapidation here to an extent, but you feel absolutely safe. And something else I really liked about Antigua is that people here are very, very kind. They really differ from people in other Caribbean countries in this way.
So we have, in general, the sort of, I suppose, because I live in Jolly Harbour, in general it's North American and UK.
It's permanent residents.
Yeah. I mean, generally permanent residents, because obviously being a permanent resident, you're not here on holiday because we're working a lot of the time, so you tend not to meet the tourists as much as other people might. But yeah, it's an international crowd, but obviously there's a lot of Antiguans who live in Jolly Harbour as well. In a lot of the larger houses, you've got people who are semi-retired. So they're semi-retired, they're coming here for lifestyle. They might do 6 months a year in Antigua during the winter, or they are fully retired and they just enjoy living here. And then you've got another section of the market which I would, as it were, fall into, which is effectively servicing those people. So all of that, I'm talking about the two sort of groups of expats. You've got the workers and the non-workers. So I would fit into the worker group. And effectively, you know, we're in the same industries as any other Antiguan people. We're, you know, bringing in, effectively it's tourist based, it might be.
So it's like a part of UK, but in Antigua?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. It's very international, and it is. I mean, and it's not as if it's a purely expat community. It's quite a mixed community. It's just that because it's a residential development, you've got a lot of hotels nearby. Because of that, and it's a good harbour. You've got a lot of boat. You've got a lot of excursions. So it tends to be very, very tourist focused. Whereas if you go to St John's, there's a lot of tourism, but as soon as you move towards the edge of town, there's a lot of law offices, there's a lot more corporate business going on. If you go to the north of the island, up in sort of Crosby's and Blue Waters area, it's more corporate Antigua and less tourist. Generally, Jolly Harbour and English Harbour tend to be very, very dominated by tourism.
Another question that I get asked quite often is regarding business in the Caribbean. I would split the question into two parts. First off, if we're talking about managing a business remotely, then naturally here is no different than Bali or Portugal, because you can easily hop on an international flight from here if necessary. People also travel here, winter here, and do remote work here, so this is all pretty clear. But if you want to talk about the local business environment, particularly during the on-season, which is winter, loads of people fly in to participate in yacht regattas, including wealthy business people from all around the world. As a result, this is a great place to do networking, and in terms of creating your own business, these areas are advantageous for tax reasons, considering there is 0% tax on international profits for private individuals. Moreover, companies are not subject to taxation here if they do not engage in activities directly on the island itself.
Running a business in Antigua is pretty straightforward. The legal system and political system are based on the UK system. Because of that, the structures are relatively straightforward. You incorporate a company in the same way. If you want to incorporate a company, you can speak to a lawyer, you can buy effectively an off-the-shelf company. It will probably take a month or so to set up.
What about banks? What about banks?
Banking, very easy. As soon as you've got residency or you've got a company, you can get either your solicitor or legal advisor to set up a bank account. But setting up a business here is pretty straightforward. If, for example, you came in, you would need a work permit. You apply to the Labour Board for your work permit. It's probably 6 weeks to 8 weeks. And then you would pay maybe $1,000 US or around about that, and then you pay that once a year. That gives you the right to reside here and run your business. But it's quite straightforward. It's simple because I think it's generally structured to allow inward investment to Antigua. So obviously the government wants people to come in and invest in Antigua, and because of that they make running a business quite straightforward, because otherwise it would just be too difficult. So yeah, it's easy.
The banking system here is overall pretty decent. It depends on the United States of America, so all payments come through US government banks. It's not convenient on all the islands, so to cite the examples of St. Kitts and Antigua, payments can take a pretty long time to arrive, even as long as a month. I had to open inquiries at banks more than once, ask for the SWIFT code, and the answers came less than quickly. But thank goodness none of the money ever got lost.
Yeah, no, there are things. I think wherever you live, there's certain things that you don't like. Okay, so potholes on the road. We do have potholes in Antigua. You just get used to where they are, but that can be a bit frustrating. When you're working, it can be tough, particularly in real estate. It is hot. It's pretty much year round, 28 to 32, which is brilliant when you're on holiday. No problem at all. But if you're dressed like this and you're going around villas, then yeah, it can be a bit, it's quite tiring, and it can be kind of, tough. Because we're an island, everything has to be imported. So because everything has to be imported, we pay duty on everything. So if you want to bring a camera in, you You buy it, it might be $500 US. It's going to come through duty, they're going to add. I mean, it is expensive to live here. I think the thing is obviously once you get used to it, you don't realize. But actually, I've had friends come and visit and they buy a hamburger and they're like, that much? And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of expensive.
Eastern Caribbean or US dollars?
Exactly. And I'm like, no, that's US dollars. And they're like, wow, okay, that's expensive. So yeah, so I would say probably in comparison to the UK, if you go to a restaurant, it's going to be 25 to 50% more expensive than the UK. In comparison to the US, probably 50% more expensive if you're buying food. So here, yeah, I mean, here you're going to start at about 15. You're not, I mean, you might find somewhere, but in general, food tends to be expensive. The one thing that's very good though is alcohol is cheap. Just remember, when you're in Antigua, if you drink rum in the morning, it doesn't make you an alcoholic, it makes you a pirate.
Okay.
The sun is set on Antigua, which means that all of the bars are going to be packed. Live reggae music, a lot of cocktails. There is, by the way, no non-alcoholic beer here. And I don't drink, but I wasn't able to find it here. So I'm going to wind up drinking some sort of non-alcoholic pina colada. By the way, this beach, it's about 3 meters deep for just under a kilometer. This is really a great place for children as well because it's so shallow. And because this is the Caribbean Sea and not the ocean, there are basically no waves here. On that note, on the other side of the island, you can go kite surfing. There are big waves there. And by the way, if you're on a boat, going around the island one way takes much longer than the other way because of the wind. It takes about 5 times longer. It's February now, so the water temperature is about 27 degrees Celsius.
So the coldest it gets here is about 28.
Coldest?
The coldest is about 28. Unless, obviously, it's been really windy, but yeah, it doesn't really get below 27, 28 is about the coldest, and then the hottest, it can get up to about just over 30, which when you jump in, you kind of think you want to cool off, and you jump in, you're like, I'm not cooling off at all. So in summer, yeah. So you're just wet and hot, as opposed to just, hot.
I want to say that it's important not to pay attention to information that bloggers just throw out on the internet. Information which then just gets rewritten over and over by other faceless tourism agencies. You should form your own opinions about this place. And in order to do that, it's important to actually come here. For me, Antigua I expected a lot less than I wound up seeing here. There are some great places here where you can honestly have a good time, and it's a very safe place where people come from developed countries to live here with their children. That's probably the most important message that I would like to get across from today's conversation. I hope this video was useful for you. You can find more materials about Antigua in the description below this video, so click the links, post your questions in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. See ya!